Good morning. Today is the 8th Sunday after Trinity, with the intent of wisdom. Now, if you've been following our liturgical calendar closely, then you might be thinking, haven't we already had this before? Don't we celebrate something to do with wisdom earlier in the year? And yes, that is true. In the first half of the church year, in fact, during Septuagesima, the intent of the gift of wisdom is actually in our liturgy. So that's what we focus on that day. But we have a different set of readings, and the focus of the day is different. And this makes sense because during the first half of the church year, our focus is on preparation and festivals and taking advantage of all of the spiritual power that is bestowed upon the world during Easter and Christmas time and those major feasts. During Trinity, our focus is a little bit different. During Trinity, we're using green. We're generally using 6 candles. We don't have quite as many festivals. And the focus isn't so much on celebrating things, but on learning things and putting them into practice. So this is where we knuckle down and where we actually do the work. And then eventually, after the end of the season of Trinity, we have Advent again, and we start with the festivals again. So it's a cycle. It's all dedicated to learning slightly different things. So what are we talking about today? What are we learning about when we're talking about wisdom? So the collect gives us a clue. Right in the collect, we say, "May we so open our hearts to the spirit of wisdom and understanding." So straight away, we've got this direction here to open our hearts. And to open our hearts to the spirit of wisdom. So this immediately sets the scene and tells us that we're not talking about our ability to do maths or recite history books, but we're talking about something a lot deeper, something that comes from the heart, so to speak. And essentially here, that these readings that we have for the day tell us something about the nature of God's wisdom and how we can take advantage of it and use it in our lives. And essentially, the purpose of this, it's explained in the collect. We ask for our hearts to be open to the spirit of wisdom so that we may ever be strong in God, our rock of ages, and may show forth in our lives the beauty of holiness. So we're not just doing this for the sake of it. We're not just acquiring wisdom so that we can hoard wisdom. We're acquiring wisdom so that we can grow stronger in our understanding of God, and so that our lives can show forth the beauty of holiness. So in other words, so that our lives can be an example to others. And in the Epistle, which is taken from the Epistle of St. James, we're told something about the nature of this holy wisdom from above. And here James draws a contrast between this earthly wisdom, which is characterized by bitter envying and strife, and wisdom from above. And about the wisdom from above, he says the following. He says that it is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, and without hypocrisy. And he says, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. So in other words, this wisdom that comes from above, this holy wisdom, this godly wisdom, is not angry or full of strife. It is peaceful. And this is something that's important to remember. Not often when we think of wisdom, we think of, similar but different concepts like knowledge or truth. But really, we're not talking about knowledge here. We're not talking about something mental. We're not talking about something that we can work out with our daily conscious minds. What we're talking about is something that comes from peace and from an understanding of God. So, basically by engaging in practices like meditation and prayer, and by quietening our daily minds and decreasing the influence that our daily conscious minds have, over our overall lives, we come to a slightly deeper understanding, a more numinous understanding. And this is the kind of wisdom that we're talking about here. We're talking about a kind of wisdom that exists at a state of consciousness that's slightly different to the one that we operate in on a day-to-day basis. So here, essentially, St. James is encouraging us to do peaceful things and sow peace, and that will help the fruit of righteousness grow within us, and we will increase in wisdom. And the gospel then continues with this theme, but in the gospel we're actually told a very interesting story. And one of the reasons why it's so interesting is because it's pretty much one of the only descriptions that we have of Jesus' childhood after, his infancy. So after the Nativity and the Epiphany, we don't really hear much about what happens to Jesus until we get to the stories about his ministry, which only lasted a few years, from when he was 30 to 33. But here we actually have a story about something that happened to Jesus when he was 12 years old. And this story concerns a tradition of the people that were living in the region at the time, which is when basically all of the Jewish people there would go to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of the Passover. And they would go with their entire families and entourages, so they'd go with their family and friends, because back in those days it was safer to travel in groups. So essentially, the entire family would go down. And Jesus came with the family on this trip, and then they celebrated the Passover, and the family left. But unbeknownst to them, Jesus had stayed behind in Jerusalem. And they didn't realise this because they were travelling with a large group. They assumed that he was with, an auntie or an uncle, and, thinking about what it would have been like with those large family groups there, it took them a day to realise that he was missing, and then another 2 days after that to then find him. And they found him by backtracking, going back to Jerusalem, and he was in the temple, talking to the priests, referred to in this gospel as the doctors. So he was talking and asking questions and giving answers to the priest's questions. And the gospel describes it as everybody being astonished at his understanding and answers. But of course his mum wasn't so amazed and so astonished. As you can probably imagine, Jesus' parents were a bit angry with him. And they said, why have you done this to us? And Jesus responds to them and says, "How is it that you sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business?" And now this statement didn't really make much sense to them, but obviously here Jesus was referring to the fact that, he was in his Father's house, he was in the temple, he was doing God's work. So this is, a really high level of maturity and understanding from a 12-year-old. And look, even at a more human and basic level, if you think about it, Jesus did the right thing by staying in the temple and not really leaving from there, because he obviously knew that his parents would come back and seek him in the temple, because that was obviously one of the places where they went together. So it's quite an interesting story. And here, what it actually demonstrates is that the kind of wisdom that we're talking about here, it is pure and it's innocent. It is, it's not the wisdom of the earth, which St. James describes as being, as being sensual and devilish, but it is a more innocent form of wisdom. It's a form of wisdom that comes from having a connection with the Christ within. As, here in the Liberal Catholic Church, we believe that Jesus was the ultimate manifestation of someone who's completely in line with that Christ within, because it is the earthly incarnation of Christ. So that is how Jesus got his wisdom. And how can we get our wisdom? We can get our wisdom by opening our hearts to the Christ within and forging a closer relationship with that. And I'll leave you now with another point about this story about finding of Jesus in the temple, which is the element of the journey that Mary and Joseph must have gone on while they were searching for him. It's kind of emblematic of the journey that we all go through as we increase in spiritual wisdom. We start at a point where we realise that we've lost something and that we're missing something. And so we move through, we go through our journey, we eventually end up with the temple. And at the temple, we find the Christ within. So, I'll leave you with that, to consider that one, and to think about how doing meditation, prayer, going on these spiritual journeys can help us to increase in spiritual wisdom. Thank you.